The French Revolution. Illuminists, buoyed by their perceived success in revolutionary America, soon turned their attention to France. Although the French monarchy was considered to be second only to the British monarchy in terms of its benevolence towards its subjects, secret societies opposed it and contrived its downfall. Professor Douglas Johnson, in his 1970 book, The French Revolution, remarked that the 18th century had not been bad for France. The population was expanding, there had been no great plagues, and no wars had been fought on French soil. The French people loved their monarch, quote, no signs of disloyalty to it could be detected, close quote. We see in the French Revolution the first time where grievances were systematically created in order to exploit them. Most history books tell us that the French Revolution of the late 1700s was a popular uprising, sparked by a starving population, rioting in protest of a bankrupt government. We are also told that fewer than 50,000 lives were lost. The truth is, however, that the revolution was deliberately contrived by the machinations of the secret societies that were rampant in France at that time, and the death toll was at least 300,000 people. When in March of 1785, the Bavarian government heard four leading Illuminists testify of satanic involvement, the Bavarian government banned both the Illuminati and the Freemasons. Through the Jacobin Society, or the Jacobin Society, and with Napoleon Bonaparte, who later seized power as a dictator in 1799, Illuminists incited the terror by design French Revolution, thought to be the progenitor of all contemporary totalitarian regimes. The French Revolution forcefully created a new secular order, but the 300,000 peasants who should have profited instead were killed in Fire in the Minds of Men. James H. Billington, now Librarian of Congress, traced and documented revolutionary activity lifted from the Bavarian Illuminati. The French Revolution was the first example of what we would later come to know as Soviet-style revolutionary communism, as Russia's revolutionary leader, Prince Peter Kropotkin, wrote in 1908, the quote-unquote Great Revolution, as he called it, quote, was the source and origin of all the present communist, anarchist, and socialist conceptions, close quote. Some of America's founding fathers were equally enthralled with the quote-unquote Great Revolution, becoming caught up in the popular Masonic fervor for liberty at all costs. John Marshall, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court from 1801 to 1835, stated that, quote, in no other part of the globe was this revolution hailed with more joy than in America, close quote. Who spearheaded this great revolution and why? The answer is clear. In 1783, 3 years before the suppression of the Illuminati in Bavaria, its adherents had already begun their work in France. In 1790, only 5 years after the Bavarian suppression, the magician Cagliostro revealed at his own interrogatory before the Holy See in Rome that the Illuminati was not dead, but actively working to ignite a revolution in France. Cagliostro recounted that at the time of his entry into the Illuminati, 1783, his initiators followed rituals read from an ancient manuscript, which stated that Illuminism was a conspiracy directed against thrones and altars, and that the first blows were to be struck against the French monarchy, followed by a direct attack on the heart of Christianity, the Catholic Church. Cagliostro explained how the Germans had secretly been infiltrating the French Masonic lodges for years, in hopes of eventually bringing them under the control of the Illuminati. Quote, by March 1789, the 266 lodges controlled by the French Grand Orient were all quote-unquote Illuminized without knowing it. For the Freemasons in general were not told the name of the sect that had brought them these mysteries, and only a very small number were really initiated into the secrets. In the following month, the revolution broke out, close quote. The French monarchy of Louis XVI was not totally blameless. It certainly needed some reforms, but even Arthur Young, the 19th century British historian, always quoted in historical circles as the strongest critic of the old regime, asserted that, quote, the old government of France, with all its faults, was certainly the best enjoyed by any considerable country in Europe, England alone excepted, close quote. That sounded choppy as hell. I'm going to read that again. The, quote, the old government of France, with all its faults, was certainly the best enjoyed by any considerable country in Europe, England alone excepted, close quote. Thomas Jefferson was led to believe that the monarchy had to go, and was surprised to find that the French people enjoyed a high standard of living, having been told in the circles of American illumined masonry that the monarchy was brutal and repressive. Unfortunately for the unsuspecting French people, the relatively good times of the 1700s were not going to continue. The revolutionaries, led and financed by the illumined Masonic lodges of France, began to initiate their plan to bring about a contrived state of chaos, a condition needed for any revolution. It was not until the summer of 1782 that the order's influence migrated from Bavaria to France, where French writer and philosopher Voltaire directed the club's media campaign. Voltaire was a cynic on church issues and had now become the poster boy to discredit the church by using satire in the plays that he wrote. The Jacobin or Jacobin clubs. After their recent exposures in Bavaria, the Illuminati had been driven even further underground, taking on a variety of names, such as the French Revolutionary Club. As radicals flocked into these new varieties of Illuminism, a larger meeting hall was needed. The Hall of the Jacobins or Jacobins Covenant was leased, and it was from this hall that they eventually derived their new name, the Jacobin Club. The Jacobin Club met in secret and eventually boasted of having some of the best educated and most influential men in France among its members. The Jacobins vowed to destroy the monarchy, as well as other existing institutions, and sought to establish what they called a quote-unquote New World Order, or a quote-unquote Universal Republic. In order to achieve proper revolutionary zeal, the Jacobins began searching for an issue to justify revolution. Soon they came upon the formula that has been used in most revolutions since then. First, they encouraged lawlessness through a group of radical thugs. Then their more influential members raised a strident call for quote-unquote law and order, and thousands of Frenchmen were sent to the guillotine. This set the stage with an atmosphere of repression. Nesta Webster presents compelling evidence that what was to follow was contrived by powerfully placed Jacobins. Quote, the Jacobin clubs were organized by the Revolutionary Committee under the direct inspiration of the Bavarian Illuminati, who taught them their method of doing business, of managing their correspondence, and of procuring and training pupils, close quote. It was thus that at a given signal, insurrections could be engineered simultaneously in all parts of the country, close quote. So complete was the organization of the Jacobin clubs in France that between 1791 and 1792, all the Masonic lodges of France were closed down. The reason for this was that once the Jacobins felt that they were in control of the nation, they were fearful that Masonry might be used, as they had been used earlier, as a cover for the counter-revolutionary scheme. This aspect of history repeated itself in Nazi Germany 150 years later, when Hitler suppressed the very Masonry that helped him rise to power. In the spring and summer of 1789, an artificial shortage of grain was created by illuminist manipulations of the grain market. I'm going to read that again. In the spring and summer of 1789, an artificial shortage of grain was created by illuminist manipulations of the grain market. This produced a famine so intense that it brought the nation to the edge of revolt. One of the leading figures in this scheme was Duke d'Orleans, the Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodges. The Illuminists claim that the revolution would be, quote unquote, for the benefit of the bourgeoisie with the people as instruments, close quote. But in reality, the conspirators held up the food supplies and blocked all reforms in the National Assembly to exacerbate the situation, and the populace starved. On July 14th, 1789, the Bastille was stormed, from where a grand total of only 7 prisoners were, quote unquote, liberated. Even French historians now acknowledge that the purpose of the revolutionaries was not to destroy the Bastille or liberate the prisoners, but to steal arms and gunpowder. Thus armed, on July 22nd, 1789, the Jacobins set into motion one of the most elaborately timed revolutionary exercises ever attempted. It would later be known as the Great Fear. A panic was created simultaneously around the nation. Horsemen rode from town to town telling the citizens that brigands were approaching and that everyone should take up arms. Citizens were instructed that the conspirators were being harbored in the larger estates, the chateaus, and that by edict of the king all should be torched. The people, obedient to their monarch, complied. The flames of destruction were soon burning out of control. Anarchy continued to grow as citizens began raiding and pillaging, and not only for food. The scene in Paris was even worse. The American minister in Paris, Governor Morris, who had been one of the architects of the U.S. Constitution, wrote that Paris in July of 1789 was a country, quote, as near to anarchy as society can approach without disillusion. The authority of the king and the nobility is completely subdued. I tremble for the Constitution, close quote. For the next 3 years, the chaos continued. Then on August 10th, 1792, a band of rioters broke into the royal palace and killed the king's famous Swiss guards, who had been ordered not to fire on the people. The king was imprisoned, and he and his family were eventually executed. It was not, however, until after the overthrow of the monarchy on the 10th of August that the work of demolition began on the vast scale planned by Weishaupt. Quote, from the 10th of August onwards, close quote, stated Webster, quote, we find the French tricolor placed by the red flag of the social revolution, whilst the cry of Vive Notre Roi d'Orléans, long live the King of Orleans, gives way to the Masonic watchword, liberty, equality, fraternity, close quote. Remarkably, even today, liberty, equality, fraternity remains the French motto and sentimental favorite of patriotic Frenchmen. During the massacre in the prisons that followed in September, the assassins were observed to make Masonic signs to the victims and to spare those who knew how to reply. Terror was rampant in the streets of Paris. The full horror of government by Satanism was being played out, complete with human butchering and cannibalism. Not surprisingly, in November 1793, a campaign against religion was inaugurated by a massacre of all the priests all over France. In the churches of Paris, feasts of reason were celebrated, where women of easy morals were enthroned as goddesses. These were also known as, quote unquote, Eroterian, and they were modeled on Weishaupt's plan to honor the god of love. This was, of course, no revolution of liberation, but one of oppression, hiding behind a shallow, meaningless facade of quote-unquote democracy. A century and a half later, the Nazi ideologue Goebbels would pay homage to the French Revolution for, quote, all the possibilities of life and development which had brought to the people. In this sense, if you like, I am a Democrat, close quote. In fact, Hitler called the Nazi revolt, quote, the exact counterpart of the French Revolution. By 1793, much of France lay in ruin. Industries were decimated, libraries burned, the bourgeoisie all but wiped out. Even the great chemist Lavoisier, who had been guillotined on the excuse that, quote, the Republic has no need of chemists, close quote. The chosen people. The French economy was in shambles. Unemployment was rampant. Toward the end of 1793, the new revolutionary republic found itself faced with hundreds of thousands of working men for whom it could not find employment. The revolutionary leaders embarked upon a fearful new project that was to be copied by tyrants ever after, called depopulation. The idea was to reduce France's population of 25 million down to either 8 or 16 million, depending on which source you believe. Maximilien Robespierre believed depopulation was to be, quote unquote, indispensable. Quote, the system of the terror and thus the answer to the problem of unemployment brought about on a vast scale by the destruction of the luxury trades, close quote. It should be noted that population reduction is an important component for world stability being promoted at the United Nations today. In France, members of the Revolutionary Committee in charge of the extermination toiled day and night over maps, calculating just how many heads must be sacrificed in each town. Fearful revolutionary tribunals tried to determine who would be killed, and a never-ending stream of victims marched to a variety of deaths. In Nantes, 500 children were killed in one butchery, and 144 poor women who sewed shirts for the army were thrown into the river. Stone quarries were a favorite site for mass extermination because of their precipitous drops and rocky floors. And it was said that many quarry operators had to shut down due to the piles of bodies. Many believed that the first French Revolution was a bourgeois movement. Webster pointed out, quote, it is true that it was made by bourgeois and at the beginning also by aristocrats, but the people throughout were the chief sufferers. This has been the case in every outbreak of the world revolution. All revolutionary leaders or writers have been bourgeois. No man of the people has ever taken a prominent part in the movement. But in the French Terror, as in Russia, the bourgeoisie were the victims, close quote. As has been the case in every incidence of the social revolution since. The kings are dethroned as per the Masonic motto, but new aristocrats just take their place, less exposed and more hidden from public view. Quote, the conception of France rising like a phoenix from that great welter of blood and horror is as mythical as the allegory from which it was taken, and has existed only in the minds of posterity, close quote. As Webster wrote, quote, not a single contemporary who lived through the revolution has ever pretended it was anything but a ghastly failure. The conspiracy of history alone has created the myth, close quote. Alois Hoffmann, the editor of Journal de Vienna, wrote in 1793, quote, I shall never cease to repeat that the revolution has come from Masonry and that it was made by writers and the Illuminati, close quote. This experiment of the Illuminati had now crossed a first major This major experiment of the Illuminati had now crossed a first major hurdle, the downfall of the French monarchy. Through patience and tenacity, with all the right people in all the right places, the French Revolution showed the way for the future. Liberty, equality, fraternity was the battle cry that had a deceptive hidden agenda, which would be followed in so many countries using similar tactics. The genie was out of the bottle, and the plan was formed. All that remained was the plan's future execution in other lands. The Illumined ones now had a workable blueprint. It seems that there is too much emphasis on the French Revolution. If it seems that there's too much emphasis on the French Revolution, it's necessary to understand it because for nearly 225 years, This model has been followed to bring about political and social change. A new world is the byproduct. The way to the New World Order lay in the breaking down, most importantly, of all other forms of government, so that the chosen few could rule in the future. The plan was not devised by a man, but by Satan himself, to enslave mankind in the mold hell would fashion. To enslave mankind in the mold that hell would fashion. This was to remain unknown, except to the people behind the scenes manipulating according to a humanist agenda, striving to make man and the world in their own image, a world without God. The Illuminati's plan is nearly complete. It is important that we clarify the real meaning of the name of Weishaupt's secret society, the Illuminati. The name implies that those individuals who are members of the Illuminati are the only members of the human race who are truly enlightened and know how to govern. Weishaupt and his followers consider themselves to be the cream of the intelligence, the chosen people with the mental capacity, the knowledge, the insight, and understanding necessary to govern the world and bring it peace. Their avowed purpose and goal was the establishment of Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new world order, or one world order. The name Illuminati is derived from the word Lucifer, which means bearer of light, or a spirit being of extraordinary brilliance. Public attention was first drawn to the existence of the Illuminati and their diabolical plan for world conquest as a result of a bizarre accident in 1785. History records that an Illuminati courier named Lanze was racing on horseback from Frankfurt, Germany to Paris, France, carrying documents relating to Illuminati activities and specific instructions for the planned French Revolution. The documents originated with Jewish members of the Illuminati in Germany and were addressed to the Grand Master of the Grand Orient Masons in Paris. As the courier galloped through Ratisbon, Regensburg, he was struck by lightning and killed. All the papers he was carrying fell into the hands of the local police, who turned them over to the Bavarian government. The authorities ordered the police to raid the headquarters of the Illuminati. This resulted in original documents being captured that revealed the conspirators' worldwide aims. All of the carefully documented evidence was brought to the attention of the governments of Britain, Germany, Austria, France, Poland, and Russia. For one reason or another, possibly from inside Illuminati influence, these governments chose to turn a deaf ear to the warnings contained in these dreadful documents. 4 years later, the French Revolution exploded on the European scene in all of its hideous fury. Sir Walter Scott, in his second volume of The Life of Napoleon, points out how the events leading up to the French Revolution were all created by money barons, the Illuminati, whose agents then led the mob in creating the famous Reign of Terror. I'm going to read that again. Sir Walter Scott, in his second volume of The Life of Napoleon, points out that the events leading up to the French Revolution were all created by money barons, the Illuminati, whose agents then led the mob in creating the famous Reign of Terror. Professor John Robison. Crucial inside information on the Illuminati came when these quote-unquote great intellectuals were foolish enough to invite a professor by the name of John Robison to join their ranks. Robison, professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh University, was also Secretary General of the prestigious Royal Society in the Scottish city. He was recognized by his contemporaries as one of the truly great intellectuals of his day. By inviting Robison to join his conspirators, Weishaupt probably felt that the British professor would prove to be a quote-unquote link in expanding his organization into the British Isles. Weishaupt completely misjudged Robison's character. Instead of finding a person with billowing vanity, tremendous self-esteem, and an insatiable lust for power, he discovered a man of great integrity, a man deeply concerned for the welfare of his fellow human beings, and for his own country in particular. Robison sought that which was honorable for the English people, and would not be deceived. Robison didn't fall for the lie that the goals of the Illuminati were pure and honorable. He kept his reactions to himself and played along with the conspirators. As a result, he was entrusted with the top secret Illuminati documents and was able to scrutinize the inner workings of the secret society at close range. Thus, Professor Robison wrote a startling book entitled Proofs of Conspiracy, which was published in 1797. Much of what is currently known about the early Illuminati comes from Robison's book, and written by Abby Burrell in 1798, entitled Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism. Both books, although the authors were unknown to each other, give us a very clear-cut picture of the organization. Both books quote extensively from the original writings of the order and the sect of the Illuminati, an official report of the Bavarian government issued in 1786 following a lengthy investigation. Adam Weishaupt was born on February 6, 1748. His early training by the Jesuits had inspired him with an intense dislike of the order. When he broke with the Jesuits, he immersed himself in the subversive and anti-Christian teachings of French philosophers and other writers who appealed to his innate sense of superiority. His next 5 years were devoted to meditation, during which time he devised a plan to overthrow civilization and to establish what he termed the Novus Ordo Seclorum. He constructed the actual machinery for revolution itself. On May 1st, 1776, Weishaupt founded the secret society of the Illuminati, the instrument by which he planned to accomplish his goal. The order was divided into three main classes. The first included novices, Minervals, and lesser Illuminati. The second consisted of Freemasons, ordinary, and Scottish knights. The third, of mystery class, comprised of two grades of priest and regent, and of magus and king. The king, of course, was Weishaupt. All initiates were required to take an oath to bind themselves to perpetual silence and unshakable loyalty and submission to the order. By way of warning as to the consequences of betraying the order, the initiate took part in a ceremony during which he was warned, "If you are only a traitor and perjurer, learn that all our brothers are called upon to arm themselves against you. Do not hope to escape or find a place of safety. Wherever you are, shame, remorse, and the rage of our brothers will pursue you and torment you to the innermost recesses of your entrails." Close quote. Weishaupt had a subtle but clear-cut plan to destroy religion. Quote, "I have contrived an explanation which has every advantage, is inviting to Christianity of every communion, gradually free